Hello and welcome back to Chapter 28. This is part 3 of Chapter 28, the last video on Chapter 28. And you remember that at the end of part 2, we were talking about the red algae, and we looked at some really nice illustrations of red algae. And remember that there's certain types of red algae are grown in the ocean commercially, grown in really large quantities. And then they're harvested and they are dried and pressed into very thin sheets, and they're used to make all sorts of good tasting snacks. Then and the Japanese nori, this little word nori is a Japanese word for seaweed, and the Japanese and Chinese and other nations as well probably actually use seaweed, a type of red seaweed in a lot of their cuisine. So anyway, so that's but we finished up talking about the red algae then in part 2. So now for part 3, we will start out with the green algae. Because they have very green chloroplasts full of green pigment called chlorophyll. And plants and green algae have very, very similar chlorophylls, and they're closely related for that reason and other things. Two main groups in the green algae are the charophytes and the chlorophytes. And the charophytes happen to be the group that's most closely related to plants. Most chlorophytes live in freshwater, although there are some in a good number of species in marine habitats, that is saltwater. And other chlorophytes live in damp soil, and they live as symbionts. We're living together with other species. As symbionts in lichens or environments exposed to intense visible or ultraviolet light. Lichens, and we don't have any pictures of lichens here, but I should maybe in the future I'll incorporate a lichen illustration here. But lichens are those kind of different colored little. They look like a small crust actually on a rock or on bark of a tree, and they can be. Well, in our area, a lot of them are kind of an orange color or different shades of green, or sometimes kind of a blue-green even. But anyway, so they live in symbionts. So a lichen is actually a symbiotic relationship between a chlorophyte algae and some sort of fungus. But anyway, that's what that is then. Larger size and greater complexity then evolved in green algae by 3 different things happening. Formation of colonies from individual cells, like the zygnema. Formation of true multicellular bodies. Remember, multicellular is a body that's made up of many cells rather than just one cell. By cell division and by differentiation. In other words, making different types of cells. And then repeated division of nuclei. Some of them have repeated division of nuclei with no cytoplasmic division. So you end up with cells that have multiple nuclei in them, cells that get kind of large and have multiple nuclei in them, and Colupra and many others, many other genera are like that. And so, here's the zygnema, colonial algae. Here's the ulva, or sea lettuce, because it looks a lot like lettuce. So there are sea cucumbers, and there's sea lettuce. You can make a sea salad out of all these things. And then the Colupra, basically the nuclei divide, but the cytoplasm doesn't necessarily divide very much. So a good variety of these things. then. Here's an up-close view of the zygnema, the ulva, and the caulerpa then. So most of these chlorophytes then in this group have pretty complex life cycles, and we've already seen some of those. And they have both sexual and asexual reproductive stages. And they also have alternation of generations. Remember alternation of generations? So what is alternation of generations? Do you recall? Yeah. So alternation of generations, remember, is they'll have one generation that's diploid and then another generation that's haploid. You know, like they'll have a sporophyte generation and then a gametophyte generation, and so on. For example, ulva, you know, and here you can see chlamydomonas, actually, a little thing called chlamydomonas, and this is unicellular. So they've got a sexual reproduction cycle. So they go through fertilization and meiosis, and then there's asexual reproduction as well. So here's some detailed look at the different cycles and the illustration, and a video of chlamydomonas moving around there. Kind of interesting little cells. This one looks like it had too much coffee this morning, I think. I mean, look at that thing. It's got the jitters. Look at that. Well, anyway, basically, now we'll go on to this supergroup called Uniconta, the uniconts. And the uniconts, this group called the uniconts, it actually includes protists that are closely related to fungi and animals. In fact, the supergroup Uniconta includes animals, fungi, and some protists that are closely related to animals and fungi. It includes two clades. You know, a clade is a phylogenetic group that they postulate has all members of that group have the same ancestor in the past. So anyway, it includes two clades then, two different branches. The amoebozoans. So amoeba means amoeba-like, kind of like an amoeba, you know, with pseudopods and things. And remember zoa. What does zoa mean? Do you remember? Zoa. Well, zoa means animal. So they're animal-like, and they've got like an amoeboid movement and things. So two clades, the amoebozoans and the opisthocons. And so opisto, a lot of times opisto actually means pointing backwards. But anyway, the opisthocons includes animals, fungi, and related protists. And so here you can see, you see it kind of drawn out, the Uniconta, drawn out into the different branches. And so these are the opisthocons, the animals and fungi and related protists. Okay, and then these then are the amoebozoans, slime molds, tubulinids, and entamoebas. So let's take a look here, and then here we've got things. So basically, here's what we're looking at now. The Uniconta. We've already discussed the excavata in this chapter, and the SAR. The stromatophiles, alveolates, and rosarians, and then the archaeoplastida. We've already looked at those as well, and that includes red algae, green algae, and plants as well. So anyway, the amoebozoans, they're basically types of amoeba that have lobe or tube-shaped pseudopodia. So the pseudopodia are lobe-shaped or they're tube-shaped, and we'll see pictures, but they're not thread-like, like the groups that we talked about before. And so in this group then the slime molds, the tubulinids, and the entamoebas. And a lot of these entamoebas are parasites, just to warn you. Slime molds then, slime molds or mycetozoans then. And myceto is usually kind of means fungus. So these are fungus-like and animal-like. They're once thought to be fungi because they have spore-producing fruiting bodies, and I think we got a picture of that coming up too. The spore-producing fruiting bodies on these slime molds. And I know like the term slime mold. I mean that it doesn't conjure up very attractive illustrations, but actually the study of slime molds is kind of interesting in a lot of ways. And there's two lineages of these things: plasmodial slime molds and cellular slime molds. And we'll go down both of those rabbit holes here today. So the plasmodial slime molds. A lot of species of these are brightly pigmented, usually yellow or gray. You don't think of a thing called a slime mold being attractive at all. But in the next slide we'll see a picture. They form unicellular feeding mass called a plasmodium. But you shouldn't confuse it with plasmodium, the plasmodium that are malaria. So it's unfortunate that they use this term plasmodium for these feeding masses in the slime molds. But don't confuse it with the plasmodium that causes malaria. That's actually in the ciliate group. Remember. So this plasmodium structure then is basically undivided by plasma membranes. It contains a lot of diploid nuclei. So diploid means, remember, it means has two chromosomes in every chromosome pair. And so look at this, kind of attractive pigments on some of these slime molds. So here's the feeding plasmodium and the mature plasmodium that's preparing the fruit, and then it produces a fruiting body. They call them a sporangium. And when these fruiting bodies are mature, then it produces, it's a stalk then with a lot of spores in it, and you can see that they perform meiosis, and these spores go through meiosis, and then they're basically released as mature spores, but they're haploid, and they germinate and produce little amoeboid cells. Some of the cells are amoeboid, others are flagellated with flagella on them. And then, wait a minute. And then these two cells joined with each other and fertilize each other then, and produce a zygote that's diploid. So this part of the life cycle is diploid, and this part of the life cycle is haploid then. So kind of an interesting life cycle. And here's some up close picture of it. Again, even though it's a slime mold, it's kind of an interesting and attractive color. Then there's the cellular slime molds, and they form multicellular aggregates, groups of them, in which the cells are separated by cell membranes, unlike the plasmodial slime molds. And the cells will feed individually, but they can aggregate, group together to migrate, and also aggregate together to form a fruiting body, produce spores. And dictyostelium, kind of a mouthful. Dictyostelium discoideum, I mean, that's quite a name, is an experimental model. They use it for a lot of experiments to try to understand evolution of multicellularity. Try to understand and theorize about maybe how multicellular life forms were formed from unicellular life forms. And so, here's the asexual reproduction. Here's dictyostoma, one of these cellular slime molds. Here's the asexual reproductive part of its life cycle. And so this is haploid. And so interesting fruiting bodies producing spores, and then emerging from the spores are the amoeba, and the amoebae then aggregate together, but they stay as separate cells in this aggregate, and they can migrate this way. And look at this. I mean, this is crazy stuff there. To think that this is a slime mold. It almost looks like a thing with like a head and a nose and body, and maybe a tail. Weird stuff. Really strange stuff. And then so there's the asexually reproducing cycle that's haploid or N, and then there's also the two of these amoebae could join together and fertilize each other and produce a diploid zygote then. And then when the diploid zygote goes through meiosis, it produces haploid amoebas that'll go into the asexually reproductive part of the life cycle. So, and here's a close-up and a little bit of close-up and detailed photograph then of the fruiting body of the dictyostelium. And now let's look at the tubulinids then. The tubulinids. They're another diverse group then, and they're amoebozoans. They have lobe or tube-shaped pseudopodia, remember? And they're common unicellular protists in soil as well as freshwater and marine environments. So, a number of different environments. Most are heterotrophic, and they actually eat bacteria and other protists. Kind of interesting stuff. And then the entamoebas. Entamoebas are parasites of vertebrates and some invertebrates. Now remember, vertebrates are things with a backbone. So the fishes, the amphibians, the reptiles, the birds, and the mammals are vertebrates. And invertebrates are everything else, anything from sponges to corals, anemones, all of the creepy crawlies, the insects, the crustaceans, the arachnids, and even the echinoderms are invertebrates. Echinoderms are the sea cucumbers, the brittle stars, the starfish, sand dollars, sea urchins. Those are echinoderms, and they're all invertebrates then. So anyway, Entamoeba histolytica. It causes amoebic dysentery in people and some animals. It's the third leading cause of death due to eukaryotic parasites. So amoebic dysentery. Now we're into the opisthocons. Then we finally reach the opisthocons, animals, fungi, and several groups of protists that are very similar to animals and fungi. And these. So then we're going to jump to protists in general. The protists then in general are found in diverse aquatic and moist terrestrial habitats. And they play two key roles in their habitats, that of a symbiont and also that of a producer, producing food for other groups. And some protosymbionts actually benefit their host, like dinoflagellates, for example, will nourish coral polyps that build coral reefs in the oceans. And we'll talk about coral polyps when we cover the invertebrates in the animal kingdom. And then also there are wood digesting protists they're in the gut of termites. So believe it or not, termites, they chew up wood and they eat wood, they ingest wood or they eat wood. But termites themselves cannot actually produce the enzymes that will break down the cellulose in the wood. But these termites have symbiotic protists in their gut that will help them break down wood. And so here's one of the symbiotic protists then in the termite gut, and you can see it's just covered with a lot of long, shaggy cilia. And then some protists are also parasitic, as we've seen, Plasmodium causes malaria, and Pfisteria shumwayii. Pfisteria shumwayii is a dinoflagellate that causes fish kills in the oceans mostly. And then Phytophthora ramarum causes sudden oak death, disease in oak trees, and we'll see pictures. And then also Phytophthora infestans causes potato late blight, and that causes kills potato crops. And that was an important contribution to the Irish famine, the potato famine in the 19th century, especially in the 1840s. And basically a third of all Irish people immigrated to the United States in the 19th century because of the terrible potato blight that was going on in Ireland at that time in the 1840s. So a lot of us that have Irish ancestors can actually trace back the Irish part of their family coming from Ireland in the 19th century. But anyway, so you can see dead oak trees here and there because of the sudden oak death disease. A lot of protists are important producers then. They serve as food for other groups. They obtain energy from the sun and convert it to carbon dioxide and organic compounds. And in aquatic communities then, photosynthetic protists and prokaryotes are the main producers in most aquatic communities. And these photosynthetic protists are limited by whatever nutrients are there. But populations of them can explode when the limited nutrients are added. When the nutrients that are usually limited are actually added in good quantities. And so, for example, so here's prokaryotic producers and protistan producers. Then, they serve as food for herbivorous plankton, and a lot of protistan producers serve as food also for other consumers as well from the animal kingdom. And then, and so these herbivorous plankton then will also serve as food for other consumers and also for carnivorous plankton, which can basically serve as food also for other consumers as well, from a lot of different groups. Whether it's fish or whales or these shrimp or krill or food for penguin and other seagoing birds. So many different groups. But it's kind of funny that they show an orca here, because they're not, the baleen whales are going to be basically feeding on the plankton, not the orcas, because the orcas, the killer whales, they actually feed on other whales and seals and porpoises and penguins, and occasionally fish, I think. But anyway, kind of a slight faux pas there in their illustrations there, but the editors of the textbook are only human, So then the biomass, the sheer mass of the bodies present, the biomass of photosynthetic protists has declined in recent years as the sea surface temperatures have increased. So as the surface of the oceans get warmer, that actually decreases the number of photosynthetic protists, because the growth of these communities relies on the nutrients that are delivered from the ocean bottom through the process of upwelling. And upwelling basically is water from the bottom or near the bottom coming up, flowing up to the surface of the ocean. But anyway, so there's been some decline in recent years, and there's some cause for concern. But hopefully that these processes will stabilize or reverse, or and we'll be in good stead in the future. But anyway, that's what's going on currently. So that's all of chapter 28. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know if you have any questions and things, and remember, study through it, listen to the videos, and look through the PowerPoint and read through the textbook. Let me know if you have any questions or anything you're wondering about the material or the class in general. And remember, as always, every day check your email and also check your Canvas as well to keep up on any announcements, any instructions, any news of things happening with this or other classes, or just news happening at the college in general. So thanks for listening. Make sure you smash that like button, and please comment and subscribe, and follow me on YouTube and whatever. So thanks again, and in just 2 or 3 days, I'll start putting up videos for the next chapter that we'll cover, the chapter on fungi. So until then, have fun, and make sure you study and strive to learn all the material here that we're covering. Thank you.